Welcome to the Empowered Aging Podcast. Your host is Michelle, a physical therapist passionate about helping older adults stay active, mobile, and independent. Let's dive into today's topic.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the podcast. If you have ever thought about your balance, your strength, or your risk of falling, but haven't really thought more about your bone health, then you're definitely not alone. And the truth is, your bones play a much bigger role in your independence than most people actually realize. So today we're talking about a newer way to assess bone health called REMS scan. It's a simple, non-invasive, and radiation-free way to get a clearer picture of your bone density and your risk for things like osteoporosis and fractures. I have been through it myself, so I can say easy peasy. So today I'm joined by Ashley Strand, who has recently opened a new facility offering this service here in Greensboro, North Carolina. And he is going to break it all down, what it is, who it's for, why it may be something you want to consider, especially if you want to stay active and independent for the rest of your life. So let's get into it. So, Ashley, I would like you to just start and tell us a little about yourself and kind of what made you get into this.
Sure. Thanks, Michelle. And first of all, thank you so much for having me on the podcast. Very exciting for me, great opportunity for me. And, I think we're both coming from the place of people who we want to put people's health in their own hands. It's a teach a man to fish philosophy. It's probably a terrible business model. Is we want people to graduate and, go out into the world.
Yeah.
So I think we come from the same place, and I'm just glad we're connecting and that you're building an audience and really educating people. I think that's the best thing we can do. I mean, obviously we can do direct interventions, but we're living such a great time now where we have access literally to all the information that humanity has compiled.
Yeah.
And you can get it. It's hard to, choose between, which information you want to listen to. But the beginning of the task is really engaging, educating yourself. And I just love that you're coming from that position. So thank you for having me on.
Yeah, well, of course. I mean, it really is about not making them dependent on us, right? We want them to know what to do for themselves. So
yeah.
yeah.
And that gives them better confidence in their decision making. And I think that's where we're going to end up. But just to give my background in all of this is I kind of ended up in this because I was sick.
Oh, okay.
I had a long COVID back in 22, and I had been in a totally different career before that. And I was just, I couldn't work. I was basically non-functional for about 8 months. And I started going to this place called OsteoStrong, which does osteogenic loading, which is what I do here as well. It's a very efficient and safe protocol for building bone naturally. And it obviously caters to people who don't want to get on meds. And I think it fits our natural approach. The body has natural mechanisms for building and growing and even healing.
Mm-hmm.
And why not access those if they're available? You were talking earlier about how important the skeleton is. And I think a lot of people think of the skeleton as just sort of the armature upon which our flesh is hung. But if you talk to an endocrinologist, they say it's the largest organ in the endocrine system.
Mm-hmm.
So if you can avoid monkeying around with the chemistry and the mechanics of your endocrine system, when there's already a built-in mechanism to build muscle and bone, why not do that? I wasn't thinking of any of that. I was just thinking, because I was a classically trained actor. I was a Shakespearean actor for many years.
Wow. Uh-huh.
And I had a one-man show that was about 90 minutes of classical text, and it doesn't play well with low energy. And it doesn't play well with brain fog. And I thought, man, I'm never going to do this again unless I find some exercise modality that I can sustain. And because osteogenic loading gives you such a powerful stimulus, you can actually gain significant strength with a 10 to 15 minute exposure once a week, which is why it's an option for so many older people who may be detrained, or may feel that they're frail, they haven't worked out in many years. It's immediately accessible to them. It doesn't overwhelm their recovery. And I was sort of in that position by dint of being very sick. And, not to get too far off the REMS, but this is the biography section of it. Part of my healing ended up having to do with something called the biocharger, which is it uses red light and PEMF, and a couple other energetic modalities, which,
And for people who don't know what PEMF is, will you?
Right, that's pulsed electromagnetic fields. And basically, if you've heard about the importance of nitrous oxide or nitric oxide, it stimulates your body to produce its own nitric oxide. It also stimulates the production of stem cells, so it's good for healing and recovery and all that. And then the red light obviously is good for stimulating the reproduction of mitochondria. So, you can't get any farther upstream in the energy chain than the mitochondria, which is why it is listed as a treatment for so many things. But primarily, for me, it was helping my energy. And so doing that red light therapy plus a few other things was the first thing in 8 months that turned my energy around.
Wow.
So I was going to OsteoStrong and I was doing the red light therapy. And then I needed to keep doing it, but I couldn't afford the membership. So I said, hey, can you give me a job? And what I found out, and they gave me a job, I started coaching. I started learning to do the biodensity coaching. And it was one of those serendipitous things where when I was in the conservatory, I had many, many coaches. I had dance coaches, I had movement coaches, I had a Pilates coach, I had an Alexander coach, a lot of posture and movement-based stuff, voice coaches. And it turned out some of that coaching rubbed off, because when I started coaching at OsteoStrong, I very quickly became, the other coaches were great, but I very quickly became a very loved coach over there. And I loved coaching. And I found that it was just something that I took to, looking at people's bodies, finding out what their particular, idiosyncratic movement patterns were, and learning to address them week by week and say, remember, whether their hips are rotated one way or the other, if they're shifted to one side or the other, their knees fall in. When you get years and years of instruction of fixing your own body posture, it turns out that had some downstream effects. So acting school paid for itself, finally.
Very interesting that how that
30 years later.
Yeah. Wow.
But anyway, and I got very lucky, it's the serendipity of showing up in a place because you're sick and you think you're kind of at your wit's end. I ran into, at OsteoStrong, the #1 practitioner of the REM scan, which is what we're talking about today, in the country, Dr. Andrew Bush. So this was approved, the REMS was approved for bone health assessment and fracture risk assessment by the FDA in 2018. And it's in the process of being approved by Medicare, Medicaid, and all that. But the institutional machinery is very slow. But it's been around in Italy and in Europe for over 10 years. And in fact, it's the standard of care in Italy since 2020. But when Dr. Bush started 5 years ago, which was a year or so before I met him, he was one of the first few people doing it in the United States. And since then, he's done 3,000 plus scans and analyzed many more scans. So just by happenstance, as a coach, I was working with people who were getting scans from him when he would visit OsteoStrong. And the thing I saw, and I don't want to get too in, maybe we can get to our first concept here that I want people to take away, is that there was a 1-to-1 concordance between people who got a good REM scan, and we'll talk about what that means in a second, and people who were strong. And the simple message that I want everyone who watches this to take away, and it's a big conceptual thing, Dr. Bush says, strength equals bone health. And I was sold on that because I just observed it over and over again. I would work with these women. I would see them get stronger. I knew where they had started out, their bone health journey, and I would see a woman come in after having done this exercise for 4 years, and she'd come out and she'd say, first of all, my T-score went from a negative 3.8 to a negative 1.1, which is profound osteoporosis into, just this side of osteopenia. Negative 1 to negative 1.4 is osteopenia. But even more important, the REM scan tells me my bone structure is good. And so I became convinced very quickly that this diagnostic was super important, because one of the other things I observed is that there were a lot of women who had quote unquote subpar bone mineral density, right? But nevertheless had good structure in their bones, right? So that's kind of when I determined that I was going to make that a part of what I did. So when I got the job managing the OsteoStrong here in Greensboro, I immediately started bringing Dr. Bush in, and then I started making plans to get my own machine and make that part of the practice there. But ultimately, I just decided that I wanted to have a little more freedom in how I ran my osteogenic loading business and my REM scan business. So I opened up my own place so I could have a little more. I think OsteoStrong is great, but they have a template, and that template works very well for them, produces consistent results. But I want to have the freedom just to tailor what I do a little bit more. So I opened up my own thing. I got my certification in the REM scan, and I started delivering REM scans. And, we've been doing it here since the beginning of the year. Dr. Bush comes in and, he comes in and does events. And then if people want a consultation based on the scan, they can go to him. So, you're getting the best scan. And then if you want a consultation based on it, you're talking to essentially the leading expert nationwide in it. Yeah, so that's how I got here.
Wow. Okay. Quite the story, really. More than I expected.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You get me talking about myself.
So let's start kind of simple, being that, many of my people aren't into the medical jargon and stuff like that. So can you explain on a very basic level what the REM scan is?
Yeah, for sure. For sure. But can I start with a question instead?
Yes.
So how many people in your audience do you think have had this experience where I spent my whole life physically active, and I spent my whole life aware of my health? I've been eating well, I've been working out, I've been maintaining my muscle. I've been doing all the things that they told me I needed to do. The bone health issue didn't sneak up on me. I've been preparing for it. And then I go and get my DEXA scan, and I've got osteoporosis. I need to go on meds. Is there anyone on this Zoom call who's had that experience?
I'm thinking, yeah.
Yeah. So I think, yeah, right. You are in tremendous condition, right? And so I think the easiest way for people to connect to this is just for me to acknowledge that experience. There is a disconnect between your experience of reality and what the diagnostic is saying about your body. So which one is right? Okay. Well, if it's not the diagnostic, what is missing from the diagnostic, right? So I just wanted to set it up in that way. But in general, I think there's a lot of fear connected to this diagnosis of osteoporosis, right?
Yes. Many of my clients are afraid to exercise. Oh, I have osteoporosis. I can't do that. Or I'm like, well, that's why. Actually. But
that's right. That's right. And the fear creates a behavior pattern that makes the condition worse.
Yes.
Right. And so I agree. We want to make this simple, but I just want to suggest to everyone that there is value in your lived experience. That's a real data set, right? It doesn't mean less because it didn't happen in the lab. In fact, if the test is not well constructed, it probably gives you, and it's my belief that it gives you a better view of your bones. If we're operating from the assumption that strength equals bone health, you know whether you're strong or not. Okay. So that leads us into what's going on with the DEXA, right? So let me tell you a story, just to go on top of that, right? So I had a woman come in, and she was one of these women who was stunned. I've been doing all the right things. My endocrinologist looks at my DEXA and tells me I'm fragile. Well, I don't think I'm fragile. And I said, well, why don't you think you're fragile? And she said, well, in the last year, I've fallen face first down a concrete set of stairs, and I've been hit by a car, and I haven't broken a bone. Do you think I'm fragile? And I said, I don't know. Let's run the same experiment with a teacup. What are we worried about? We don't want to break a bone.
Right.
Well, if we're going through high impacts and we're not breaking bones, that's data. That's the real. We're worried about a fracture in the real world. When I was at OsteoStrong and now here at Better Bones, if I have a client come in through the door and say, I fell and I didn't break any bone, we celebrate that. We call that a successful fall. We go, successful fall. Right? But it's very hard because we're so afraid, because we know the outcomes of a fracture are so extreme. We're very afraid to question the official narrative from the docs, right?
Yeah. Well, they're the king too, the doc is king, and he says, I have this, then that's what it is.
And you've been trying to do the right thing your whole life. So if he says this is the right thing, you feel as strong. But I just want to encourage, and I know I'm spending a lot of time on this, I just want to encourage everyone to give proper weight to your own lived experience. And in my opinion, the science is intimidating, especially when you have this threat hanging over your head. Oh, if I fracture, there's a 30% chance that I'm going to die within a year, right? That's the stats on hip fractures for women over 50. It's terrifying, right?
Yes.
But I think good science should always accord with common sense, right? So that's a way to choose between competing expert narratives, right? Does it make sense?
Yeah.
So let's talk about the DEXA. The DEXA measures bone mineral density. That's part one. Okay. I'm gonna lay out the two parts and then we'll go part by part. Part two is it measures the cortical bone. Okay. So let's put the cortical bone to the side. We're gonna talk about that in a second. It measures density. Okay. Bone is a structural material. Do we agree on that?
Yep.
It's the structure that we're hung on, right? It's also the largest endocrine. Let's not forget that. But it's a structural material, right? So, common sense. Do we evaluate a structural material based on its density or on its strength?
Depends if you ask a doctor or an engineer.
You got it. Exactly
I love that
right.
about Dr. Bush. I love that comparison.
Yeah. Yeah. Are you going to have a doctor come in and go, yeah, this house looks sturdy? No, you're going to talk to an engineer. Or another great example that Dr. Bush always uses is chalk versus wood. Chalk is super dense. So all this dust packed into a very tight structure, right? Well, a tight form, right? Wood is, 4 to 6 times less dense than chalk. But if you drop them both on the floor, the chalk's gonna shatter and the pencil will bounce, right? You're not going to build a house out of chalk, right? And again, it's common sense. If we're worried that our bones are going to break, we're worried that they're weak and we want them to be strong, right? So first of all, the measurement of density is questionable because already the DEXA is not telling you anything about the structure of your bone, right?
Mm-hmm.
So let's use the house analogy again. It's like, well, this stucco is very dense. Yeah, but if the whole house is made out of stucco and there's no frame, it ain't going to do great in the next big wind, right? Mm-hmm. So that's the density versus strength part of it. So where does the strength reside in the bone? Now we're going to get to the cortical side, right? So broadly speaking, in the axial sites, which is the lumbar spine and the hips, those are the biggest load-bearing sites. So that's what you're getting measured in most bone assessments, right? They're bone density most of the time, but in assessments of your bone, you're usually getting the lumbar spine and the hips because they bear the most weight, right? And it's the biggest consequences to your quality of life if you have a fracture there. So those bones are made up of 2 types of bone. There's the outer shell, which is called your cortical bone. And then there's the inner structure, which is it's a dense network of interconnected fibers, which are called trabeculae. That's your trabecular bone. That is where the structure of your bone resides. Now, the DEXA, when it was first introduced 30, 40 years ago, was a great tool because you could see inside and get an assessment of the cortical bone. And there's an associative, although not a causative, relationship between bone mineral density and fractures. In other words, fractures are associated statistically with lower bone mineral density. However, it's not been demonstrated that it's causative, right? So we're getting a little too technical here. Think about it this way. The DEXA assumes that if you look at the outside of the bone, the outer shell, you're going to be able to predict what's going on in the inside of the bone. It turns out that's not true, okay? So one of the reasons we question DEXA as the standard is that by some measurements, up to 70% of fragility fractures happen in people who don't have osteoporosis. So in other words, you can show there's a correlation between low bone mineral density and fractures, but 30 to 70% are happening in people who have osteopenia or normal bone. So why would that be? It goes back to the density versus strength thing, right? If we want to know whether something's likely to fracture, we want to know if the structure is good. Well, the DEXA just doesn't look at the structure, right? It doesn't look at the structure. It assumes that the density of the bone tells you something about the structure, but it turns out that's not the case. So, I don't want to reveal, well, let me use myself, right? I've observed over and over and over again that there are women who have osteoporosis as measured by their cortical bone mineral density, who, when we look at the trabecular structure, have strong bone. Now, How do I know that's true from a practical side of things? Because I also see them pushing multiples of body weight on here. So again, that's lived experience that validates the scientific scan, right? And it tracks with what we know about the body, right? The body has defenses, one of which is called neural inhibition, right? Your body will not let your muscles express enough strength to break your own bones, right? That only happens in elite powerlifters and sometimes world-class sprinters, where the muscle development has outpaced the bone development, and you're exerting extraordinary forces. For the most part, your muscles will signal your bones to adapt. As your muscles get stronger, the bones get a signal saying, hey, we got to be able to handle these new contractions. So they build too. There's a great physical therapist named Pete Egoscue, who you may know of. And that's one of his famous phrases is, the bones always do what the muscles tell them to do. Okay. So here's an image I like to use just to make it nice and simple. We don't know what's going on with our bone, right? We have windows onto it. So let's say your bone health is this little sphere inside a globe that's dark. And over here, we have a little window that's DEXA. It's small and it's smudgy. It tells you some stuff about your bone. Over here, we have a big clear window. That's REMS. REMS tells you how dense your cortical bone is, but it also shows you an image of your trabecular bone. It takes a picture using sound waves, right? It takes a picture of your structure and tells you how good that structure is. So it tells you everything you need to know about your bone. And then there's another window over here, which is what we started talking about, which is your lived experience, specifically strength, right? Yeah. So every time I see a woman come out of that office, or if I do the scan myself, and she's got a good structure, she's strong. But if I'm just looking at the bone mineral density, I can't really predict whether she's going to be strong or not, because I see women who have good bone mineral density who are strong, and I see women with bad bone mineral density who are strong, right? What I don't see is women who are weak with good trabecular, good structure, right? So, I mean, for instance, I'm 53 years old, and I've been doing osteogenic loading once a week for 4 years, 4.5 years. Okay. I'm super strong on this machine, depending on which machine you trust. And it does, the main thing with using this kind of exercise is you want to be working at your maximum effort or close to your maximum effort. That's, Wolf's Law showed that repeated high resistance training at near maximal loads remodels bone over time to make it denser and thicker, right? So I've been doing it for a long time. Depending on which machine you trust, I can do 12 or 20 times my body weight on my legs. However, if you look at my REMS scan, which gives you both your bone mineral density and the quality of your trabecular structure, I have osteopenia. Now, I'm a 53-year-old man, and I've been doing this exercise for 4 years. And when I saw that yellow band on my hip, I was angry. Right? I'm like, what the heck, man? I eat well, I exercise, I'm doing a specific bone thing. But then I come down on the next page of the scan, and I see I'm in the green on the fragility score. And so you got this test. So let's talk a little bit about your test. Can we talk about your experience of the test?
Yeah, sure. Go for it.
Okay. So I think you tick all the boxes, right? You've been eating right. You've been working out. You're very strong. And you got a DEXA score that said you were I think in
Penia
osteopenia
porosis
on your
depended
hands.
on which graph I was looking at, I swear. But
Yeah. So when I scanned you, if we're just looking at the bone mineral density, that's the outer shell, right? You're an osteopenia on your hips and you're an osteoporosis on your spine, right?
yes.
And if that were the whole story, which is the whole story for 99% of women who are getting an evaluation of their bones, you'd be like, this is a mystery. I guess all the stuff that's in my hands doesn't work. I better get on these meds. So I just want people to understand, get the whole story about your bones, because the second page doesn't exist on the DEXA. In some cases it does, but it's not paid for by insurance.
Okay.
So again, the vast majority of women aren't getting that. And there are problems with the trabecular assessment using DEXA that we don't have the time to get into.
Okay.
But my thing is, get the whole story, because for you and for me, when we get to the second page of our report, we go,
It's like,
oh,
yay.
there's the strength. You know?
It was a relief, to see that.
It's a big relief. And then after a while you go, well, how did I get so brainwashed? And you kind of do it to yourself to think that I was fragile when I know when I'm working out, I'm not. You know? So this is not to say that I don't want anyone to have a cavalier attitude about a severely osteoporotic reading on a DEXA scan. I think it means you need to pay attention, but paying attention means getting all the information. And I think because the DEXA has made the threshold for diagnosis based only on the bone mineral density of the cortical bone, and the threshold for treatment based only on the bone mineral density of the cortical bone, this T-score, that these meds are being wildly overprescribed. And that doesn't even get into the mechanism of the medications, which is a whole other thing. And, I'm not a doctor, so I don't want to hold forth on it. But what I do little talks around, and if anyone, we'll leave some information about me. I have an osteoporosis talk where I go through with slides and all this stuff, and it's a little easier to understand. The one thing I say to everyone is, if there's a doctor who wants to put you on any medication, really, they need to be able to tell you what the mechanism of action is, right?
Yep.
How is this doing what it tells you it's doing? And the short answer for bisphosphonates, which is they're called osteoclast inhibitors, they inhibit the mechanism that removes old, damaged, brittle bone. The simple way to think about it is what we were talking about earlier. It messes around with the internal chemistry of your bones. And what is the cost of that? Well, one of the costs for bisphosphonates is that there was a Harvard study in 2010. I mean, this is a long time ago. This is old information. 500 women, 470 odd women, whatever. 82% of the incidence of what they call atypical fractures happened in women who were on bisphosphonates. What's an atypical fracture? Normally, you break a hip because you fall. An atypical fracture is you fall because your hip has broken. Okay? So if you think about how the medication works, well, first of all, just from a common sense standpoint, should bone meds make your bone more fragile?
Right? What
right?
the heck?
It doesn't pass the smell test, right? And then they're associated also with something called osteonecrosis of the jaw. And what if we know our Greek, we know osteo means bone and necrosis means death. Does it pass the common sense test?
No.
And so we say, so I think one of the things, the concepts, and by the way, I'm not casting any aspersions on any medical professionals. I think I just assume the best of everyone. But I also know that people get in a lane and they sort of get a fixed idea about something, and it's hard to get them curious about what's outside that because they're dedicated to doing things by the book too.
Mm-hmm.
So if the book's wrong, you can have someone who's very dedicated to the book and believes that's helping their patient. But here's what I think is happening is because T-score is the threshold for diagnosis, and how you evaluate improved bones is improved T-score, the meds are designed to treat the test, but not the patient, right? Because if the way the medication works is to stop your body's natural process of removing the old damaged cells, by definition, you're holding on to more old brittle bone. Does it make sense now that after 5-7 years of this, your bone is so brittle that it just breaks under your own body weight and you fall because of a fracture? Makes sense, right? But the test says, hey, you've got a lot more bone. Are you healthier? Right? So, but all of that, all of those, everyone's making the right decision. Okay, the T-score, my bone mineral density is bad. I need it to get better to get healthier bone. If we just said, stop everyone, it's not all about the BMD, what about the structure? Then we don't go down that path. We don't get obsessed about the bone mineral density. If we stop and go, wait a minute, it's a structural material. Is density really what I'm concerned about? Well, right?
So who do you think should go that next step to getting the REMS? Is it only the ones who have that low density, or do you suggest everybody get it? I mean, let's start with something doable, given that insurance doesn't cover it.
Sure.
Want to be.
Yeah, insurance doesn't cover it. I mean, I think right now it's not a super expensive test. I charge $200 for it, and if you want a follow-up consult with Dr. Bush, it's $300 for the whole package. I think it's pretty reasonable.
Yeah.
But for a lot of people, $300 or even $200 is a lot. It's a lot for me.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I don't have to pay for them. I just do it. But I think for peace of mind, and I think especially for people who are under pressure to get on these meds, which a lot of people are, and by well-intentioned doctors,
Sure.
right? I think if you want to make the best decisions about anything in your life, you need to have the best information. And if we're talking about your bone's ability to resist fracture, well, you need to know what the structure is. And the great thing about the REMS is that you saw when we did your scan, there was the red zone and the yellow zone and the green zone.
Yeah.
And this is on the fragility chart, right? The green zone is they take an image of your bone and they compare it to 5,000 people who have a similar bone structure. And they go, well, how many of those people had a fracture? Anywhere in the green is no fractures. So people of your age, with your bone quality, there is zero incidence of fracture, in spite of the fact that you have osteoporosis. But what does that mean? Low bone mineral density, right? And by the way, yeah, go ahead.
Have you ever seen
Go ahead.
Where they have good T-scores, good density,
Yep.
but weak strength? Does it ever go that way?
I haven't seen as much of that, but it is possible. And it's a great point, right? So if we have these two factors now, density and structure, cortical, trabecular, the four possibilities are all there. You can have good cortical and good trabecular. And what I see a lot of is bad cortical and good trabecular, but you can also have bad and bad, and you can have good and bad. So notice that that the DEXA can give people with high bone mineral density a false sense of security. At the same time as it can give people with low bone mineral density a false sense of alarm. And neither of those things is good. So I think that gives me the short answer to your question is anyone who really wants to know their actual fracture risk or a much more accurate fracture risk wants to get that REMS, right? So if you're in the green like you were, and so it's crazy, right? For you on your first page to see all this red on your spine, but then on the second page to see you're in the green. There's no one your age in there, they have whatever it is, a 20,000 plus individual database. No one at your age with your bone structure has fractured. It's two totally different stories, So I think it's worth getting it. And let's go back to the great point you made is people get afraid to move.
Yeah, that's big. That's big.
So let me tell you a couple interesting things. One is there was this great, and I will send you a link later because I got to find it because I remember the idea, but I don't want to get too specific about what it says. But there was this great archaeological study where some archaeologists dug up an early agricultural settlement that was, and they got some that was located in a place where the population had been pretty static. So they did genetic testing and they were like, oh, this is the same people. These are the ancestors. It's not like new people came in. It was like there was a genetic connection between the two populations. It was geographically, it was a stable population. And they saw that these people who were, early farmers, basically, had much denser bones than the people who are still on the site. Right? So this is something that I just feel like this.
That's the cortical density?
That's density, but, so, it's not that density doesn't mean anything. They didn't do a REM. I wish they'd done REM scan, right? But bone generally grows together. We have said that you can see both like good density and bad trabecular and bad density and good trabecular. But the point is that the development of bone is different between basically the same genetic population given two totally different behavioral patterns. These were people who were doing manual labor all day long, and their bones were more robust. They dug deeper and found a pre-agricultural tribe that had been living there who were hunter-gatherers, and their bones were similar in robustness to an orangutan's.
Oh, okay.
So it tells you, and when you're looking at a population, you can draw broad generalizations. And these were Europeans, by the way. And I hear a lot of women come in and go, oh, well, I kind of fit the thing, I'm white and I'm thin, and so I'm predisposed to it. And I'm like, okay. There were a lot of robust, thin white people who preceded you, and you're here. If you were like, if we were like genetically weak, we would have been weeded out, right?
Yeah.
But it's such a powerful demonstration of how much behavior affects the expression of our genetics, right? And people have heard a lot about this probably as epigenetics, how important your daily behavior is to the expression of your genes and how much it's in your power to go back to what we talked about at the beginning, taking charge of your health to affect the expression of your genes. And I think, there's this narrative out there that I'm doomed by my heritage, or I'm doomed by my frame, or whatever it is. And it's like, No, put yourself in the right environment, subject yourself to positive stress on a regular basis, and you will express a sturdy skeleton. You were designed to do that. You weren't designed to sit around on the couch. You weren't designed to be in an office chair 8 hours a day plus an hour in a car. You weren't designed to be sitting around. You were designed to be, solving problems constantly over the day to keep yourself and your family fed. And then you fall asleep and you're not looking at a screen.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Good health equals bone health. Show me one person who's unhealthy who has fantastic bones. They don't do that study. Right? Show me one person who's super healthy who has bad bones. They don't do that study, right? I think it's very easy to think, if we ask the question, well, what is the only thing that has been shown to reliably increase bone mineral density in random controlled clinical trials? Well, it's the meds. But none of that takes into account how the meds work, what the cost is, or the fact that hanging on to old brittle bone does nothing for the structure or the strength of your bone. But if we ask the question, what are the things that influence bone health?
Yes.
May I go through a list?
Yes.
A partial list?
Yes, please do.
There we go. I got a partial list here. What influences bone health? Okay, vitamins and minerals, right? If you don't have the building blocks for bones, you can't build bones. What about protein? How many older women do you say to, listen, I want you to build muscle, but you need to put protein in if you want to synthesize protein, right? How about volume of food? You're getting enough protein, you're getting enough minerals, but your protein is being burned for energy because you just don't eat enough, right? When you get into diet, right? Then you get into absorption. What if you're taking medications that influence your absorption? Then you can't get the building blocks in to synthesize bone. What if you've had a surgery that compromises absorption? Hey, your gallbladder isn't working well. Don't take bile salts. Let's just remove the organ, right? But now, do you have the disease osteoporosis, or have you just removed part of the puzzle that delivers the nutrients to the bone? Do you have to accommodate for that, right? Maybe you had your sigmoid colon taken out, right? Because you were told there's no way to heal that, right? And then there's genetic disorders that compromise absorption. What if you have like MTHFR and you can't methylate your B vitamins? Cellular energy, right? You get into energy, that's another thing. What if you have mitochondrial dysfunction? What if you have blood oxygenation dysfunction, sleep apnea, right? If you're not, you spend 8 hours of your day, 30% of your day not breathing properly, guess what? Your body is a ruthless economy. And the example I always use is if I go outside and it's 30 below and I'm in my underwear, what's going to go first? My pinky toe or my brain?
Oh, yeah, that pinky toe. Yep.
I had someone say, well, if you're outside in your underwear at 30 below, your brain's gone already. Someone said that once, right? Yeah, but it's going to be pinky toe first.
Yep. And
brain's going to go before the heart, and heart is last. Right? Your body's a ruthless economy. So how many of us are operating at suboptimal energy, suboptimal oxygenation? Okay, so that's going to have a cost on every biological process in your body, one of which is bone synthesis. And if bone synthesis isn't the most important thing your body is doing, you can bet your life that deficit is going to be taken out of that. Right? So let's go on, just because I love this list. Let's go on. Where is it? I'm on the right. Listen, I'm glad.
I'm waiting for exercise to be stated here. Surely that's on there.
That is on there.
Activity, whatever.
I just went the wrong way. Here we go. Yeah. blood oxygenation. Then we get into metabolic disorders, right? Diabetes, insulin resistance, stuff like this. What about autoimmune disease? What if you have a thyroid problem? That's going to mess with your bone synthesis. Cardiovascular disease. If you have compromised circulation, you're not getting nutrients into the tissues and you're not getting the toxins out. If you have inflammation, pathogens, right? All of these things can affect your bone synthesis. Molds and parasites. What's going on in your environment that is affecting your overall stress load, your overall inflammation load, right? Miss or overprescribed medications. What if you have an endocrine disorder? Sleep disorders, right? Sleep. All the repair that happens. And by the way, the vast majority of bone remodeling happens when you're asleep. So maybe that YouTube video was super interesting. And maybe you're just like, you've gotten used to hearing a voice when you fall asleep, but you got to just weigh the cost. Is it better for me to have some sleep hygiene and get good restorative sleep so I can deal with all the stress of the day? And then, of course, there's lack of physical activity, stress, So the reason I go through that whole list, and it could go on and on, if you just ask the questions, what are all the things that influence the optimal operation of all my biological functions? How many of those can be addressed by diet, sleep, exercise, supplementation, detoxification, and mindfulness? And how many of those are either free or low cost? Supplementation is not low cost.
But
detoxification is not high cost. Mindfulness, praying, going out in nature. So, and I only sort of get on my soapbox about this because I think people get trapped into this mindset of like, I only have one option. That's to get my bone mineral density higher. And the only way to do that is to use the meds. And I go, wait a minute. There's so many other levers you can pull, right? And, I would love for someone to show me the strong person who has bad bone structure. And what I know from working with mostly women, I work with men too, but it's mostly women. What I know is that I tracked 100 plus clients over their first 6 months doing osteogenic loading, which is 15 minutes of work a week. It's static resistance, so there's no impact, but you're able to express a very high level of force. My average client was age 67. My oldest client was 90. I had 100% results in improving strength. Everyone got stronger. If you think I'm over 50, exercise is just a game of managing an inevitable decline, you're wrong. I'm sorry, you're just wrong. Your muscles have the same ability to grow and adapt as a 20-year-old's, right? In other words, if I can so when I started OsteoStrong, I was 51 and that was my feeling. I'll only get weaker. A year later, I had doubled my chest and my leg strength. And it was, after having been sick, it was so encouraging. Because when you get a diagnosis, you feel like, I've lost my power. But when you can make a real world result and say, whoa, in this movement, I'm twice as strong as I was a year ago. I never thought that would happen. It's super encouraging. But just to go back to my 100 people that I tracked, the average age was 67. And the lowest result in terms of increasing strength, and I want everyone to understand that this is at your maximum and at your best leverage, okay? So the numbers are going to seem crazy. The lowest result was a 36% increase in leg strength.
That's good.
The highest result, and this is over 6 months, average age 67, was a 742% increase in chest strength.
Wow.
Now that's relative to that person. Okay, she was someone who had an old shoulder injury. Her chest muscles had atrophied for decades, but we applied a safe, focused, targeted, high load and very specific stimulus, and that muscle came back.
Mm.
And she got more than 7 times stronger. Actually, by the time I stopped working with her, she was 10 times stronger than when she had started in that range of motion, right?
Mm-hmm.
Most people over 6 months increase their strength by, 75 to 175%. And what do they all say to me when I point that, when they come in and I go, look, you can increase your strength 75% in the next 6 months. They all go, but is that going to help my bone mineral density? So if you take anything away, I want you to understand strength is bone health.
Yeah.
The bones do what the muscles tell them to do. And you have so many levers you can pull, and they're simple. Eat better, sleep better, exercise regularly. This is not the only exercise you have to do. Anything that keeps you strong is sending a signal to your body. We have some purpose, right?
Yeah.
And that's why I mentioned mindfulness too.
Mm-hmm.
Have a purpose. Yeah. Everyone who comes in, they come, and the people who succeed, the number one thing they say to me is, I want to be able to play with my grandchildren.
Yep.
I go, that's a
Have a
great,
reason.
good,
Mm-hmm.
good.
Yeah.
Let's focus on that. Anyway,
So
I could go on.
I want to back it up just a little bit.
Yeah.
So now that you've explained what it is, can you just kind of step through what someone would experience when they walk through the doors?
Yeah.
This is very different than a DEXA. So what is it? What would they go through just for this scan?
Sure. First of all, they'd walk in and they'd see this beautiful view.
Yes, they would. It is a beautiful view from that office. Yes.
And then they'd go into the exam room over here, and we have an exam table. You lie down on the table. It's an ultrasound scan, so I have a little wand. You lie under a paper cover. You're wearing loose-fitting clothing, so I can adjust your shirt up and the waistband of your pants down. Underwear stays up. You're always covered with a paper cover. I just need to be able to access the hip and the spine with the wand. We'll put a little gel on. We scan your lumbar spine first, and then we scan your hips. And, where it's a little different from a DEXA is the program won't give a result if I haven't gotten sufficient information. So one of the big issues with DEXA is that as many as 90% of DEXA scans have errors. Now, some of which is not a great standard for the gold standard of diagnosis. Some of those errors are small. A lot of those errors have to do with interpretation. In other words, you get a scan and then you have to wait for the results, right? So they get sent away and somebody has like 500 scans they have to go through in a day and they're checking through the numbers. Maybe they don't see that there's an artifact that has changed your, an extreme example would be like there's some hardware in your spine and someone just misses it. And so there's this huge density spike. And it's like, wow, that lumbar looks really good. I mean, usually they will throw out anything that is more than one standard deviation from the other lumbar things. But there are a lot of, because the DEXA has to be interpreted, there's a lot of errors associated with it. And I've seen some really big ones. I had a woman who had a 30+% swing on the bone mineral density of her left hip after 1 year at OsteoStrong. And she was like, whoa, that's amazing. But then a couple of years later, she had a 30% swing in the other direction. And she's like, what's going on in my bone? And after working with the REMS, I was like, I think that's an error, right? Mm-hmm. So, but just sorry, I'm getting into the differences. Let me walk you through the experience. So you go in there, I scan you. The scan takes anywhere 30 to 45 minutes, and that includes the time we come out to the computer out here, and I've downloaded the scans onto a USB drive. We put it in the computer, and I explain your results to you. So because it's an automatic and instantaneous result, you find out right away. And, I don't make any medical recommendations. I'm not a doctor. I'm a certified REMS tech. But what I do is I tell you what your results are that the machine has decided they are. And it's not subject to interpretation. There's a little reference screen where I make sure that the target tissue was in the target zone. And if that's good, we know it's a good result. So I explain to you, okay, your BMD, according to these standards, is low. However, your bone structure looks good. And then I send you the results. You get them that day. You don't have to come back to me and ask for them or whatever it is. It's your information, and you can take it to your doctor. If you want a consult with Dr. Bush to explain in more depth what it means and how the results are arrived at, and just to explain to you more about the importance of your bone structure and why there's this difference between DEXA and REMS, you can do that too. But most people come in and get the scan and they have the result and they go, I'm going to go show this to my doctor.
So what would be next steps after that? If you found that, okay, that structure.
If you found you have bad structure.
Yeah. What's your next step?
So, I think you want to get some medical advice at that point, certainly if you were taking it to a doctor who was not familiar with it, you could have them reach out to Dr. Bush, or to, there's other people I could put them in touch with, the people from Ecolight, which is the company that designed the REMS. I think
because you have programs there for strengthening, yes?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, that's one of the things you can do. I think that depends on the severity, although I will say, I think for me, if I see a very high fragility score, I like to send someone to a doc before they start this.
Okay.
It doesn't mean that they can't do this, but how I'm going to progress them is different.
Okay.
Right? So in other words, where you start affects how you start. So if I see you have, let's say you're in yellow, which means that, you're like, well, what is yellow? Either it's no fracture or fracture. Red is everyone who has this bone quality and is your age has had a fracture, right? And green is everyone who has this bone quality and is your age hasn't had a fracture. What's yellow? Yellow is where some of the people have and some of the people haven't, okay? So if you're below the midpoint of the yellow section, sort of the so-so bone, or even above that, if you're anywhere in the yellow, I always advise, hey, talk to a doctor about this. But if you want to start this, we're going to go carefully, right? What gives me confidence to work with people who have not the best bone structure or somewhat concerning bone structure is, again, that neural inhibition, but also my own attention to detail. In other words, we always ease into our exercises and ease out. And one of the things that I learned very quickly is how strong you are, right? And I temper how I deliver the session based on that. And there's, some people are ready to go. I just, like I said, I haven't really encountered anyone who's strong, who has a poor trabecular structure. And similarly, I'll encounter people who haven't had a scan and come in and are very weak and don't progress well. And it's the same thing. I go, listen, your body should be responding to this. So we can keep doing this, but we're going to have to go slowly, right? I appreciate that I'm giving a probably too nuanced of an answer, and I appreciate the opportunity for me to go, hey, come here, do my thing. I want everyone to make the best decision for them. If you're deep in the red, I'm not going to put you on the machines.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to send you to a doctor first. If you're in the yellow or the green, I'm going to put you on the machines, and I'm going to observe your strength curve, because your body is not going to let your muscles get ahead of your bones. And consistency is the key. As long as you're coming in consistently, you're working in good form, and we're being safe, it's a good solution. And particularly if you're detrained, if you're someone who's like, I don't like gyms and I haven't worked out in a while, the exercises are very easy to learn. You get benefit from them immediately, and it only takes 15 minutes a week. But I had a woman who came in the other day. She said, I just got a result from a CAT scan or something that said I might have a dilation in my aorta. And I said, you mean like an aneurysm? And she said, yeah. And she said, do you think I should go see my heart doc first? And I was like, yeah. So, I just want to encourage, as much as I want to promote my own business, I want to encourage everyone that there is a way for you to stimulate your muscles to grow that your body can handle. So never mind the bad bone structure. And this woman, I'm sure, didn't have bad bone structure because her thighs were very strong and very well formed. I'd say it's amazing when you start to see the correlations, when you just go, that person's robust. I don't care what the bone mineral density says, and I can see her do the thing, right? But there's a great book by a doctor named Lauren Fishman called Yoga for Osteoporosis, right? Yes. So I just said to her, I said, I think that's going to be your solution, because you can't deal with intra-abdominal pressure. And so a high intensity weight thing is not going to be right for you. But for many people it is. So that's a long answer. Yeah, what time is it, for goodness sake?
So
it's 3:10. Oh my gosh.
So if someone were interested in pursuing the scan, would they just call your office, make an appointment? I can leave stuff in our show notes on how to contact you. Easy, right?
Yeah. Thank you for walking me through the basics of self-promotion here.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just now's the part where you give your yes. So they can call. My website is betterbones.life. My email is very simple. It's my name, Ashley, ASHLEY, @betterbones.life. There's a contact form on the website, and the phone number is 336-235-3448. Our intro sessions are free. They take about an hour. We do a wellness assessment, so I know what's going on. For instance, if you have an aneurysm and you haven't mentioned it to me, I know that before I put you on the machines. And then I take you through the 4 exercises. We start out with a warm-up, gentle warm-up, and we finish up with some balance work. Our 3 goals are to make your bones stronger so you're less likely to break if you fall, to make your muscles stronger so you can catch yourself better, and to improve your balance so you're less likely to fall in the first place. So the first session takes about an hour. After that, it's 15 minutes in and out. We have some other modalities that you can do that assist recovery. We have red light and PEMF, which I talked about being so important in my own recovery in the past. And those are extra. But I take you through the whole thing, and it's very simple. And yeah, that's it. And if you want to have a REMS, just call. We'll set it up. And you can also book online. You can go on the website and there's book a session, book a REMS, any of those ways.
Excellent. I thank you so much, Ashley, for talking with us. It's been a great conversation, and I'm hoping the audience now has a better understanding of how important bone health really is. And I think, like you said, the big takeaway is, we can do something about this, and strength
So many things.
is a big part of this. So if you guys are curious about your own bone health, this would be a great time to explore it. I'll leave this in the show notes. Check the scan out. Just learn more about it. But more than anything, it's about your ability to do something. You're not helpless in this realm.
Take charge.
So, as always, if you guys have any questions, please feel free to reach out. And I thank you all for listening, and have a great day. We'll see you next time.
Thank you so much, Michelle. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for joining us today. If this episode helped you learn something new, we hope you'll share it with someone who could benefit as well. Until next time, keep moving, stay strong, and take care of your body.